Okay, so manifold bolts are out, valve covers are off, rocker shafts are off, and I pulled the 10 bolts out of the intake manifold. And I thought, well, how am I going to get this thing out of here without having to go to the chiropractor tomorrow? So I remembered I had an engine lift plate and an engine hoist, so I'm just going to lift it up, pull it out of here, see what's on the bottom side of it. So I built this pressure test rig on this manifold to be able to put some air pressure in here and see if the water jacket was leaking. So I found some old aluminum plate laying around, and I just put a couple holes in it, and then I put the actual Velcro gasket behind there just to sandwich it in place on each side. And so this water jacket only goes through the front of the heads here, of the front of the end. It's the front of the intake manifold. It doesn't actually go through the back. So if you look back towards the back here, you can see the rear air intake port, but then the rear water jacket's actually just blocked off back here. So you only have to make 2 plates here. There was a write-up I saw online which made this super easy. Somebody said, hey, you should just pressure test it yourself. You can make your own pressure test rig. So here in the front, I just used the water pump crossover hose, and I put a piece of 3/4 inch PEX plug in here. I just put one of my extra 3/8 inch pipe plugs in the water neck over here, and then for the thermostat housing I just used the radiator hose, and I used a 1.25 inch pipe cap, and I just put a hole in here and threaded a airline quick disconnect fitting in it. And then I did the same thing on the other side here. I put another aluminum plate I had laying around in this side and just tightened the thing down and sandwiched it in place. And it looks like, well, I can apply some air pressure here. So I thought I'd be crafty and have some way to put a regulator on my air compressor line here, but I don't have a way to regulate it and turn it down as low as I'd like to. So I just used my hose and pressurize this thing. I guess I could have left the fitting out of the end if this is what I ended up doing, but so I can pressurize it quite a bit, and it's not leaking hardly at all. Like, it's getting to a point, there's probably 12 to 15 psi in this thing. And I've got a little bit of a leak like right around this gasket on this side here. When I pressurize it, it blows some bubbles out of there, but it's not near like it was. So when it was on the truck, it was really blowing a whole lot of air out of there. Like, it was, you know, you guys heard it, it was really coming out of there fast. So now it looks like I've just got a tiny little leak here at this manifold plate. And the bubbles coming out, but it's not near as fast as it was. So before, it wouldn't even hold pressure hardly. It just made this, like, you know, blowing sound like that. It was blowing out so fast you could actually feel it with your hand and hear it coming through here, where now it looks like I've got a good solid block on here. The holes are all plugged up, and that air that was escaping underneath the manifold somewhere is no longer escaping once it's on the bench here. So I think the manifold's good. I'm gonna try to go back and clean up all these surfaces on the bottom of it. I'm going to clean up the surfaces on the heads where this thing bolts down. So you guys saw when I assembled this engine, I used these cork gaskets underneath here. And I just wasn't happy with the way these things fit even from the beginning. I had to take a razor blade and cut them down to get them to fit in between these intake manifold gaskets here. They wanted to just like cause issues and cause me something to like cause like a limit to how low this intake manifold go on here. So I think I'm going to take these off of here when I redo these intake manifolds tomorrow and just use a silicone bead across here. So anyway, good news, intake manifold is not cracked. It is holding pressure, and so we're going to go back to cleaning this thing and putting some more sealer on here and then trying to reinstall it a little more precisely on the motor this time. So I'm going to try this intake manifold one more time, hopefully one last time. So I went back to O'Reilly's this morning and picked up another set of intake manifold gaskets. So new set of Velcros. So the last ones were kind of crushed, and we saw from that leak test, obviously one of them was having a little bit of an issue anyway. So it looks like they come with a distributor seal here, which there's already one on the distributors. We're not going to use that. And these two cork things, which I'm really worried caused me a good problem last time. So those things are out of here. So I'm going to follow the DIYFord.com write-up. Those guys did a pretty in-depth write-up on how to install this manifold. I'm not sure they recommend any particular brand of gasket. I'm going to stick with the Velcro. They do usually recommend not using the cork gaskets, and they recommend this specialized Motorcraft, I think it's a TA-31 silicone sealant. This is made for their the Ford diesel engines, so it's supposed to be super oil resistant. It's supposed to dry really well and have a good consistency to it and have a good tack up level to it, and make sure you get a really good seal. So I'm going to try this stuff, as well as taking my time installing the manifold with the cherry picker and then following their torque sequence also. They posted a link to the exact torque sequence you're supposed to use on torquing this manifold down. So I'm going to clean it up, make sure everything's like surgically clean with brake cleaner here. I roll locked the bottom of the intake manifold, so I'll clean it all off with brake clean. I'll clean the heads off with brake clean very, very well. Get the sealant out, get it ready to go, and set that intake manifold back in place. Alright, so look at this. I put the intake manifold back on, obviously, and then I pressurize this thing. I can still hear it leaking. I can feel, as I pressurize this, I can feel like air moving in this general area here outside the block, as well as hear it like coming out from the like the inside of the manifold here. And then, so I'll show you guys. I pressurize this thing. See it blowing out from underneath the head right there? This is just soapy water. Look at that thing. It just like blows out all from the inside, the underside of the head gasket. So obviously it's just like blowing air out of those gaskets somewhere. I don't understand what it's doing or why. But so now I get to, I guess, put head gaskets on the thing now, or something. It seems kind of ridiculous. Looks like it's foaming here at the water pump gasket too. It's ridiculous. Yeah, look at that. There's not much pressure on here. I can still squeeze with my hand just fine. Ugh. Annoying. So it looks like I'm pulling the motor back out of this truck. So I'll just go back like 2 videos on how to take the motor out of your F100 in just under an hour, and reference back to that on how to pull this thing out and set it on the floor. I think what I'm going to do is just take the motor out, set it right on the floor, leave the transmission and everything hooked up on it, pull the intake manifold, and then pull those heads off, swap the gaskets, and that water pump as well where it was leaking around the edge. If you take that water pump off, put some sealant on there, and put it back together so I'm not fighting a leak there once I get this thing actually running once and for all. Okay, here we go. Cue the fast forward motion. Okay, so here we go, redoing work I've already done before. So intake manifold has to come off, heads have to come off to get those worn out gaskets off of there. So I bought another set of intake manifold gaskets. I guess there's a chance I could reuse these gaskets that are in here for the intake manifold. They've been used once before, but they've just been installed and torqued down. The motor's never been run. So maybe it's safe, maybe it's not, I don't know. So for the head gaskets though, obviously the big leak is there. I went with the high rent head gaskets. Got some multi-layer cometics. So it's got a compressed thickness of 27 thousandths, so that shouldn't bump my compression down too much. Going from the advertised 20 thousandths here to 27 thousandths with these cometics. So I'll get this pulled apart and we'll check those heads for any sort of obvious signs of, I don't know, warping or someplace that they didn't seat together with that gasket correctly. And if we don't see anything, I'm going to just throw those cometics in there. And then I'm going to obviously pressure test this thing before it goes back in the truck. Just because that's a huge pain pulling this thing in and out of there just to pressure test it. Here's the gaskets here. I don't see anything that looks like it'd be real suspect to making them leak. I mean, they're, let's see here, it says front sides in the front, and nothing looks like it's real crazy here. It does look like maybe that this big giant circle around here, how much larger these rings are. You can see the aluminum crushed down on the iron is quite a bit larger than the actual bore diameter. And it would have to be blowing from one of these coolant passages on out. Maybe it was blowing mostly out the... This is the side here that was leaking so bad. Kind of weird, the whole thing's just like coated in oil too. Makes me kind of question what's going on there. What's not sealing, or is there a passage plugged up that's like making it squirt oil out under the surface of the gasket somewhere? So we look, there's like chunks of stuff on the block here. I don't know what this is. Is that part of the old head gasket material? It looks like sealer almost, but there's no way that's sealer. I don't know what that stuff is. Maybe some sort of a coating from the gasket? I don't know. That's a weird one. So I'll clean this thing up. I'll clean the heads up. I'll stick those MLS gaskets on there and we'll pressure test this thing. Okay, so everything's brake cleaned. Looks like I used entirely too much of that gray Ford sealant when I went to seal these things back up. It took me a while to get all that crap scraped off of there. Everything's been cleaned up with brake clean real nice. It's ready to go. It's interesting, these gaskets fit like very, very tightly to the bore. And then they each have this like relief cut out here around them. So there's like an oblong relief there, and then the two down on this side, which is kind of odd. You don't see that very often. Okay, so these things have a series of directions on them that just say that these rivets have to clear the block, which they clearly are far above and below the block here. And then it also talks about these water passages being squared up over the hole and not crossing the hole. The only problem I see is that it actually looks like this hole underneath here, or the water jacket hole under here, is kind of this, I don't know, like kidney shaped hole. And this has a round hole. It doesn't really seem to seal up that well. But if you look at the original like Velcro head gaskets that came in the kit, this is oriented the same way. It says front here, and obviously the big pins go down. But it has the same thing. It just has a single circular hole for that giant kidney-shaped cutout underneath there. So I guess we'll try these and see how they do. I'm going to run these the same way the Velcros run, where it blocks off the front cooling passage up here on both sides. So front and front, and it leaves the cooling passage open in the rear back here. And the directions on these head gaskets do recommend that you put them in dry with no adhesive or no spray, copper, or any sort of chemicals on them. So they're dry, clean, everything's brake cleaned and ready to go. Well, I'll say this, torquing the bolts down this time versus torquing the bolts down last time with those aluminum gaskets and feeling the bolts like squish and squish and squish that gasket down, and then you'd start in the middle, work your way out. By the time you got to the outside, the ones in the middle are loose again. So this time with these Cometic gaskets, man, that thing is rock solid. We got to the outside here, whew, still out of breath from going around and around those things. But I get back to the outside, I'd go back and check the insides, and they were still just as tight as they were before. So obviously the head wasn't doing any sort of like odd pulling, squishing motion like this. It seems like it was pulling against a nice flat piece of steel and really locked down. So let's hope that gets it. I'm going to get that magical gray sealant out again. Not as much of it this time. And seal up the intake manifold, put it back together, seal up that water pump, and get this thing ready to set up overnight. I'll come out here tomorrow night after work and pressure test it and see where we get. Hopefully this is done and we can put this thing in the truck and fire it up. So check out this fabulous test fixture I made. I was trying to come up with some like PVC plugs to plug in these hoses and put hose clamps on them, and then I was looking around and I saw the radiator sitting on the ground over there, and I was like, huh, you know what? Easy solution. So I just hooked the radiator up to the front of the block, blow some air in here, see what she does now. I don't hear anything. It's holding excellent pressure now. It seems much better. I guess to be sure, I'll get the radiator pressure tester and put on there and pump this thing up and let it sit for an hour or so. So it seems like my pressure tester is kind of taking a crap on me here, but if I pump it up slowly, my tester will actually put pressure in there, and it hasn't moved a bit. It just sits there and holds pressure. So I think we're good. I'm going to let this thing go and pick it back up with the hoist and drop it back in the truck.